Day. Independent voters who aren't dedicated to either the Republican or Democrat parties could have a big say in who wins.
Independent voters are very much like a lot of other voters.
Right now, independent voters are the key to this election. They will have a major say in how this all plays out.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in and welcome to the show. Tonight we're going to be discussing independents in the United States and their impact on the 2016 election. More and more Americans are becoming frustrated with the current two-party system and feel that neither the Democratic nor the Republican Party are able to represent their ideologically moderate views. Independents are becoming a highly influential group, and their capacity to decide elections is going to be a game changer for candidates on both sides. Tonight we have a special guest, Roddey, a leading voice for the independent movement. She's here to speak with us about the experience and the impact of the independent voter in the 2016 election. Thank you for being here tonight, Caroline.
Thanks for having me, Kristen.
So, Caroline, I understand that you have studied the behavior of self-identified independents during the 2016 election. I was hoping you could start tonight off by telling our viewers a little bit about the level of turnout among independents in the election.
So there isn't much data surrounding the specific turnout of independent voters, but there is data showing that, interestingly, millennials were the only age group to see an increase in voter turnout since the 2012 presidential election. And in addition, millennials are increasingly registering as independents. Wow. So from this data, we can assume that there was likely a higher voter turnout amongst independents in the 2016 election.
Wow, seems like even our younger voters especially are refusing to be defined by party labels. So would you tell us a little bit about the impact of this increased turnout? Which way did independents lean in both the primary and the general election?
Sure, so independents behaved very distinctively in the 2016 election. In the primaries, independents voting on Republican and Democratic tickets overwhelmingly chose the outsider candidates. So for the Republican Party, this was Donald Trump, and for the Democratic Party, this was Bernie Sanders. In the 28 states with recorded exit polls from the Republican primaries, Trump won independent voters in 19 states while tying with other candidates in 3 states and losing by only 1 point to Cruz in North Carolina. Similarly, in the 27 states with recorded exit polls from the Democratic primaries, Sanders won independent voters in 24 states and lost by only 2 points in Georgia. So these results are really poignant in displaying just how frustrated independent voters are with partisan politics in the national legislature. In the general election, independents were much more split, but they still favored the political outsider, Donald Trump, with 46% of independents voters going to Donald Trump and 42% going to Clinton.
Wow, this movement of the independent voice and preference for the outsider really makes you wonder how our two-party system will continue to survive and manage this. So, is there anything else you found that distinguished independents from partisans in this past election?
Well, you know, Kristen, it's really interesting. There was actually a gendered split amongst independents in the 2016 election. So while Republican and Democratic men and women had very similar support for their respective candidates, so 89% of Republican men and 88% of Republican women voted for Trump, and similarly, 87% of Democratic men and 91% of Democratic women voted for Clinton. Independent men and women were much more split, with 50% of male independents voting for Trump and 47% of female independents voting for Clinton.
Wow, a different experience to vote without simply following your party's nominee. So I'm hoping we can shift now from speaking about the 2016 election to talk a little bit more about your personal experience as an independent. I understand that earlier in your career you were a leading political analyst aligned with the Republican Party, and I was hoping you could provide our viewers some insight on how your ability to lead an analysis work has changed since shifting to the independent voice.
That's a great question, Kristen. You know, as an independent, I'm able to see beyond the two-party system and dig deeper in my analysis without distortion from party leaders and standards. Additionally, I'm able to make much better connections and build stronger relationships with both political leaders from both sides and voters as an independent.
Interesting. Would you tell me a little bit more about why you think people are more likely to engage with an independent?
Well, you know, today's political climate is just so intensely polarized. We see it everywhere. So when people hear partisan labels, they're just going to make a number of assumptions and then shut down. With the two parties appearing to be in constant conflict, no one likes a partisan. But, you know, people trust independence, and thus they're more likely to open up to us.
So do you think that this is why more and more Americans are self-identifying as independents? They're seeking out this benefit?
Well, there are certainly benefits to being an independent and the discourse it enables.
But wouldn't people be more inclined to shift to be independents based on a disagreement with a party platform, or feeling that party policies don't represent their views?
Well, perhaps both, but...
Do you find that most independents are truly ideologically moderate?
Well,
Well, Caroline, my next segment was actually intended to discuss how the rise in self-identifying independence is changing the political landscape in the United States by refuting the evidence that most individuals in the U.S. align with a party by the time they reach 18, mostly by early political socialization, strong generation effects, according to some research, even genetic predispositions. But perhaps this independent movement is not refuting this data at all. I mean, from what I'm getting from you, it seems that this might not be the case, that perhaps independents are not all that different from partisans, perhaps even partisans gone undercover.
Well, Kristen, I'm not too sure about that, but...
Well, we've got to take a short break, but when we get back, Caroline sure has given us a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.